I want to speak more specifically on Kraven's Last Hunt.
Or Fearful Symmetry.
Or Fearful Symmetry, as it was originally titled.
I gave it the cornball title that it's now known by, but Mark DeMattis, who was the writer of this whole 6-part storyline, it was called Fearful Symmetry. It had the Blake poem sort of rewritten slightly to accommodate Spider-Man.
You came up with the idea to spread this across all the Spider-Man titles at the time.
I had previously edited a bunch of Marvel titles, like maybe a few years earlier before I took over the Spider-Man titles, and it was a big difference. When you're editing Captain America, Fantastic Four, the Avengers, X-Men, Iron Man, Thor, all that stuff, each one is sort of like, they get one shot per month, and you're always thinking of, this overwhelming assemblage of superheroes and trying to keep them all different and fun and exciting. Whereas you're almost forced, by having to edit so many Spider-Man titles, to really think a lot about Spider-Man and figure out what works, what doesn't work. When I grew up reading The Amazing Spider-Man, there was only the Amazing Spider-Man comic book, and it was like a soap opera that you would get involved with all the characters and the subplots, and you really couldn't wait for that next issue. Later on, when Marvel was getting bigger and bigger, the editors were under pressure to come up with more titles to feed, the owners of whoever may own Marvel, that decade. They would come up with whatever they could think of. They had Marvel team up where, this character who was known as being a loner would be with a different superhero every month. Like they would have a spectacular Peter Parker, the spectacular Spider-Man, Web of Spider-Man. But then the thing that would drive me crazy when I would look at these books is that it seemed like he had a different girlfriend in each title.
So there was no consistency.
It seemed like 3 separate Spider-Mans.
Right.
And they had like different logos. And, there shouldn't be 3 Peter Parkers and 3 Spiders. It should just be one guy, and we should believe that, And so everything about it, I changed the logos at the same time as Kraven last time. So instead of like each book had very different logos, I made them all look like the Amazing Spider-Man logo, like that one right there, which to me is the real Spider-Man logo. And I wanted each one to feel like this is the real Spider-Man.
Right. Yeah.
I thought if I do all 6 parts, there were 3 new Spider-Man titles at the time, it would in 2 months it would have more of a sense of an epic, that this was an important story, and you'd be able to find out right away. I mean, as a fan, that would be like, yes.
It's funny you mentioned the sales team throwing up the red flag, because nowadays this is common practice, and especially for sales, I mean, it's kind of used as a tactic to bring more people in on a title that maybe some people aren't reading, like an X-Men crossover would be a perfect example. If some people aren't reading X-Factor, they'll say, well, make sure X-Factor is a part of the story because we want people to start reading X-Factor after this.
I think a big part of it was, this was over 20 years ago that this story was created, and newsstands were still a big factor in the sales of comic books. So they were worried. On the newsstands, the resistance was, or even worse, subscribers.
Yeah, because they're missing out because they don't subscribe to web or Spectacular.
Exactly. People were able to read it as quickly as possible, or to get it all in one book.
Now, I want to ask you this question.
Yeah.
And then we'll discuss it.
Sure.
You've said several times over, and you mentioned it earlier, this is the greatest Spider-Man story ever written.
Sure.
Tell me why.
Well,
in as many words as you like.
To me, it's just a story that's never been told before and hasn't been told since using Spider-Man. The idea that one of his villains successfully kills Spider-Man and replaces him successfully, and just that's never been done. It wasn't really shocking. It was it's
Does everyone know what they're talking about?
Yeah.
I mean, there was a specific sequence in here, which you could read.
Would you like me to read it?
Yeah, what has happened here is Kraven
Page 37.
has more or less killed Spider-Man, or at least buried him alive.
He don't nail him, kill him.
And Kraven is now wearing a Spider-Man costume, and he's going out battling crime. So just a few captions.
The spider lies in a grave, 100 miles from here, down in the darkness, blasted into oblivion by my hand. My greatest enemy, my greatest torment, that black, hideous, beautiful beast by my hand. But it's not enough to simply destroy him. I must become him. I must prove myself superior to him. And laugh in the face of his hovering